And sad tweet this week. I was tempted to give it to QT and Raj, but sad tweet goes to Ric Flair, who was not happy about comments made by Dutch Mantell on his Storytime with Dutch podcast. It started with Dutch reacting to comments that Flair made on his podcast about his retirement match last year, that Conrad Thompson promoted, and he was teaming with Andrade against Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal. He was asked about nearly winning the Worst Match of the Year honors in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Awards, which, for all the people who shit on them and claim they mean nothing, boy, they sure do cause a lot of controversy every year and get a lot of people talking about them. But Flair's match would have had top honors this year locked up, but lost out to Vince McMahon's match with Pat McAfee at WrestleMania, which was terrible. So Flair heard this, right? He responded to the news on his podcast and he said, I'll take that because it was the shits. It was the shits because I made a mistake in not hydrating. Let them have it again. No, I mean, I'm serious. I think about it all the time. Let me have the match again. Because the one thing I never thought about was to keep myself hydrated, which I found out my doctor told me the other day. I just went to get my heart tested and all that. He's my new doctor here in Tampa. So he's reading my medical records. He goes, you drink 9 to 12 beers a day. The idea that you do that every day is that I'm looking at your blood work. All I can say is that if you're going to keep drinking like that, you have to stay a little more hydrated. That's the only thing. So just drink more water. He said, I assume you won't quit drinking. I said, you got that shit right. And he said, just drink more water. The man is 73 years old and probably went into the match half drunk. If he's drinking 9 to 12 beers a day, there's no way he wasn't drinking before he went to the ring that night. Now, maybe for Ric Flair, he doesn't get drunk because his body is used to it by now, but there ain't no fucking way he went to the ring that night without at least having a few drinks. Then he got defensive about all the people who criticized the match and his performance and called it, it was disgusting. His response to this was to boast about how much money he made from it. He said, I don't pay any attention to that. You know what I say to that? I made $300,000. Go fuck yourself. That's right, I made $300,000 disgusting you. Disgust yourself for $300,000. How about that, motherfuckers? That's really all it's ever about with Flair, is the money. His response is to flaunt how much money he made off the marks and tell anybody who disagrees to go fuck themselves. So Dutch, on his podcast, was asked about this. And this is what he said. I've had people write me, and seriously, people thought he was going to die. I think he passed out a time or two in there. He doesn't even remember it. Ric Flair now is trying to leave a legacy, and he should have left it alone, or changed a lot of the things in that match, because his legacy now is tarnished. I don't know. Ric Flair is full of shit, and always has been. Flair couldn't help himself and took to Twitter to post a picture of Dutch with a message. Thank God they used the word veteran and didn't call you a legend. Just a miserable old wrestler trying to make a buck. And by the way, you never had a legacy to begin with. Woo. He puts woo at the end of every tweet. It's like Hulk Hogan putting HH. He then followed up with a second tweet. I just made you more famous than you'll ever be from a single tweet. Woo. Calling Dutch a miserable old wrestler trying to make a buck is what we call projection, boys and girls. Dutch said nothing wrong. Flair looked pathetic out there. Watching him in that ring was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. Barely able to move, trying to get oxygen into his lungs, and by his own admission, he passed out. He passed out twice during that match, has no memory of the end of the match. After the match, he said he had 6 beers in his hand, and Undertaker, it was either Undertaker or his doctor, took them away from him and handed him a Gatorade to drink instead. Imagine after that match thinking, you know what I need right now? Half a dozen beers. That ought to get me back up on my feet. I'm surprised when they take blood from the man he's got anything other than Sam Adams coursing through his veins. He attacks anyone who has even the slightest criticism. He did it to Jim Ross a few months ago. Jim Ross has called Ric Flair the greatest wrestler to ever lace up a pair of boots. Attacked JR for comments he made about him in the Dark Side of the Ring episode on the plane ride from hell. Flair said JR lost every bit of credibility he ever had with him in his life because JR said sometimes you need to know when to walk away from Ric Flair. Flair said WWE learned to walk away from JR. I'm going to the 30th anniversary of Raw. Do you think he is? Woo. A few months ago, he went hard at Shane Douglas, and I know Shane Douglas in the past, he's not had very nice things to say about Ric Flair, but those comments are from years and years ago. Shane, I think, he was probably doing a shoot interview. He asked, or was asked, about Flair. This was in December. This was before the holidays. And, I mean, it wasn't flattering, the things that he said about Flair's final match and about Flair's drinking, but he seemed sincere enough and I think part of it also was he shared a story about a convention appearance that Flair made, and I think it was a relative of Shane's was at the show. He might have been Rick's driver and claimed he had him stop at the bar. I don't know. He told some kind of story, but in the end, and he seemed sincere in saying this, he said that his Christmas wish was for Flair to find peace in his life and be able to enjoy it with his grandkids. Flair heard about this, and he went on a rant about how Shane just can't get over me after 30 years. This from the man who still won't shut up about how Jim Herd tried to ruin his career and about all the horrible things Eric Bischoff did to him in the late 90s, 25 fucking years ago. So he shamed Shane Douglas for working at a Target store, which he did many years ago, and then he went back to teaching. But he worked at a Target once, so he felt the need to point that out. This is what the man does. And when other wrestlers say nice things about him, he's always very quick to bring that up and say, oh, so-and-so said something very nice about me. Like he's constantly seeking validation, but he acts like he doesn't pay attention or care about what other people say about him. Bullshit. One of the greatest of all time and also the most insecure. Ric Flair strikes again and wins this week for said tweet. It seems like he realized he made an ass out of himself. Either that or somebody got to him, because last night Flair posted another tweet calling for a truce with Dutch, saying, Dutch, let's just agree to hopefully growing old reluctantly but gracefully. We as old veterans need to be united, not at odds. Look at that. A sober moment. He must have been hydrating. NXT hit a roadblock on Tuesday with a big main event signed for Stand and Deliver next month. Shawn Michaels picking an opponent for Grayson Waller that was not Dragon Lee. And Roxanne Perez defending her women's championship against Meiko Satomura, but leaving the building on a stretcher. First, let's talk about Dragon Lee. Dragon Lee did appear on the show. He was shown in his mask in the crowd and was introduced under that name, so hopefully they let him keep it. I have no problem with the way they introduced him. I know some people did. I mean, look, they've done that with lots of other people before. Usually they would do it on their takeover shows. But I would rather they introduce him now and get him on the card at Stand and Deliver against somebody rather than wait another 3 weeks and then show him waving in the crowd. He made his in-ring debut at the NXT house show in Florida last night against Carl Fredericks, who left New Japan last year, signed with WWE in January. Now he goes by the name Eddie Thorpe. How about Dragon Lee? Here's an idea. How about Dragon Lee accepting Wesley's open challenge for the North American Championship? Lee against Lee at Stand and Deliver. That would be incredible. I would open the show with that.